So very, very warm welcome to you all this afternoon. Welcome to another fantastic International Women's Day event as we harness the theme of Break the Bias. My name is Neil Hudson-Basing. I'm the Corporate Events Manager at London South Bank University. And this afternoon's event, it's entitled London's Historical Blue Plaques, Who Do We Remember and Who Do We Forget? So you'll see I'm joined on screen by some of the people you'll be meeting over the course of the afternoon. But before I hand over to them, I just have a few things to take you through in regards to virtual housekeeping, starting with a short statement on respect and dignity. So everyone attending or speaking at an LSBU event, whether in person or virtually, should be treated with respect, dignity and courtesy. LSBU operates an environment built on equality, inclusion and acceptance. We value contributions, feedback and comments and wish to create a space for sharing, learning, celebrating and bringing communities together. We don't tolerate any form of bullying, abuse, harassment or discrimination. Inappropriate behaviour will be treated seriously and acted upon. You'll be removed from the webinar as well. We want these events to be a really enjoyable, warm and safe experience for all. So thank you for adhering to these guidelines, and I'm sure it's not going to be a problem this afternoon. Just to take you through the Zoom functionality, fantastic to see people using the chat box already. Please continue to share your thoughts, your comments in there. It's really lovely to see them. It helps to break down the virtual wall we're experiencing, yeah, far from detracting from the event, it helps to bring the event to life. You can also share your thoughts and comments on Twitter, and I'll pop in our details shortly. The next button along is the Q&A box, and I'd like to ask you to reserve your questions in there. We might lose them in the chat box. So let us know who your questions for in the Q&A box. You can also upvote on the questions you most want answered by clicking the little thumbs up symbol, and that boosts them to the top of the box, and we'll work our way through those. We've factored in lots of time for Q&A. You'll see that I've enabled closed captioning, which are the subtitles you can see appearing on your screen right now. If you don't wish to see them, you can click on the little up arrow next to CC live transcript and you can hide your subtitles, but we do enable those in the interest of inclusivity and accessibility. Finally, thank you so much for joining us. Together, we really can break the bias, and I'm going to hand over to my wonderful colleague, Professor Kate Beaumont, who's going to give us another welcome and a bit of scene setting. Kate, over to you.
Thank you, Neil. So yes, just to echo Neil's words, you're all very welcome virtually to LSBU, London South Bank University, and we're really, really glad that you're able to join us here this afternoon. So this event is our LSBU Public History event to mark International Women's Day 2022, and the theme for International Women's Day this year was Break the Bias. So thank you very much to Geoff, who is our local historian extraordinaire for those of us who live I'm in Tooting and Somertsfield and Earlsfield and Balham. And it was Geoff's work that has inspired this event, and he'll be telling you much more about his work in a moment or two. So just before I introduce the panel to you and we get going, I think that the whole question around blue plaques is something that you will hopefully all be familiar with in walking around the streets of London and indeed in other cities in the UK and elsewhere. When you look, sort of stop looking at your phone or look up from where you're walking and around the buildings around you, you might often see these blue plaques which are celebrating individuals from our past to have made some kind of contribution to their local area or to society. And just last week, I was walking around, had a meeting near the Mall in London and was walking just off Pall Mall, and I saw two blue plaques, one to Lord Kitchener and one to Charles de Gaulle. And then yesterday I was in Brick Lane and there was a plaque. I've been looking, obviously because of this meeting, I've been looking at them a bit more. And there was one to Thomas Fowle Buxton, who I'd never heard of before, who was an anti-slavery campaigner, and he had a plaque in Brick Lane. But it's not surprising that those three examples that I've just noticed in the last week are all men. And one of the reasons for the event today is to ask the question, why is it that according to English Heritage on their website, only 14% of English Heritage blue plaques in London represent and celebrate the lives of women? And then of all the blue plaques in London, only 4% represent people of colour. So this is what has prompted this event, alongside Geoff's work and the work of Louise and the work of Cathy, who you're going to meet in a moment, and the work of English Heritage, which is we're represented by Rebecca, of trying to break that bias and to ensure that we have a more inclusive and a more diverse, and I would argue as a women's historian and feminist historian, a more interesting representation of past lives and lesser known women's lives in particular. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Just to explain how this is going to work. So each of our panelists are going to speak for approximately 7 minutes. We've been quite specific. And at the end of their 7 minutes, I'm going to bring my little buzzer, which is thus. So don't be alarmed if you hear that. You're not checking into a hotel. It is actually telling our speakers that their 7 minutes is up. And then we'll move directly on to the next speaker, and we will have time at the end for lots of opportunity to answer your questions and to have a discussion. Really, one of the things we want to sort of come away with today is, first of all, find out about the amazing work the panelists are doing to break this bias, but also what more can be done. So that's kind of our objectives with this session today. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who, as I said, inspired the event and has worked closely with me in kind of identifying our great lineup of panelists. And that's Geoff Simmons. And Geoff is a local historian, as I said, quite extraordinary local historian whose passion for local history is just amazing. And I've had the very lucky opportunity to meet Geoff and talk about his work. Geoff runs a community history project in southwest London called Somerstown 182, alongside his day job as a graphic designer. And his work includes guided walks and tours, working with schools, putting up plaques. And amongst his recent plaques, which have gone up around Tooting, my local patch, is to reggae superstars, the Daffodil King, which I pass daily, and to Sadie Crawford, the lost woman of British jazz. And Geoff has just found a home for the people of Wardley Street, celebrating Wandsworth's costermonger heritage. But as Geoff and I spent a day an afternoon, we met up looking at where to put the plaque to the Corruganza, I'm pronouncing that wrong, I'm sure, Geoff, the Boxmakers, which is a really interesting story. And I think Geoff's going to talk more about that now. So over to you, Geoff.
Okay, thanks very much, Kate, and hello everybody. Just wanted to say I was hoping to show you some pictures with this talk, but somewhere along the line they've got a bit lost in the ether. But listen, there are plenty of pictures behind me, as you can see, so hopefully you can get a bit of an idea of some of the things I've been doing. So as Kate said, I'm all about promoting local history in this area: Tooting, Wandsworth, Earlsfield, along the River Wandle, doing walks, tours, going into schools, and almost as a kind of a sideline with that is as I kind of drifted into sort of putting up local history plaques, and really it's kind of working with all sorts of people, and you know, it became apparent to me pretty early on. I kind of started out doing a First World War project, and it was pretty apparent that I was talking about blokes all the time, and also I was kind of appealing to quite a narrow audience of mostly kind of older people, and kind of got around that one by, you know, I was connecting with all sorts of great groups around the country who were doing things to talk about the kind of contribution to the First World War of Southeast Asian soldiers and people like Walter Tull and other groups, and I kind of broadened my appeal a bit and started talking to everybody and being very conscious about what I was doing. So my plaques, I mean, one of the most recent, as Kate was saying, was the reggae music one in Tooting. Very fortunately, that was sort of connected to it was on the site of a local business, which is a sort of West Indian cafe, Mixed Blessings bakery, and the benefit, you know, they will get out of this plaque is enormous. It'll become a kind of stopping off point on various reggae tours in London. Anybody interested in that music can't fail to be thrilled by the sight of that above this colourful bakery in Tooting. And we had a really great day unveiling that. I mean, one thing I always really want to do when I get my plaques and kind of think about them is do everything, you know, in advance, get them made up months before it actually goes on the building, so I can sort of take it around, show it to people in the community, get everybody really involved in it and excited, go into schools, put photos on social media, maybe kind of start working with local kind of art and crafts groups and charities, and really push it, really squeeze the maximum out of it. I mean, one that we did a couple of years ago was for the promoting the growing of daffodils in this area through the fact that somebody called the the Daffodil King had lived around here, and everybody loves flowers. Everybody loves making up flowers. They're in bloom now. Tooting is kind of famous for Sadiq Khan, for the Tooting Bec Lido, for St. George's Hospital, and it's now famous, I like to think, for the growing and development of daffodils. And you know, we even got BBC Gardeners Question Time coming down here just before lockdown to do a little piece and to actually visit the Daffodil King's house on Garrett Lane. And, you know, it was after the First World War project, and we'd done all that, and we were all kind of, you know, thinking where we're going to go next and feeling a bit miserable after all that. We really needed uplifting, and it was what happened after the First World War. It was kind of the jazz age and kind of swinging, and along came somebody called Sadie Crawford that we found out lived in our area and kind of was one of the BBC Radio 4 lost women of British jazz. So we had a brilliant time promoting that one. I mean, Sadie ticked all the boxes. She was kind of mixing with African Americans who were coming over here, you know, in the ragtime age after the First World War. She still had living relatives that we connected with. We got into the schools. We had a local school initiate a kind of Sadie Crawford music scholarship. It was just a really brilliant thing. And then last year we did something relating to the centenary of the Olympic Games, the centenary of the 1920 games, and a Tooting athlete won a couple of medals there. And again, you know, got local schools involved, running up and down the street, raising money in Fircroft Primary School. We got a couple of local Olympians, Jade Johnson and Eric Boateng. You know, they'd actually represented this country in the Olympic Games to actually turn up and unveil a plaque. And, you know, again, you know, massive traction out of that. The local athletics club, Herne Harriers. You know, probably the best known person that I've celebrated, Mark Bolan, somebody that everybody knows, but what they don't know is that his seminal teenage years were kind of spent educating himself in a prefab, basically around the back of where I'm speaking to you now. So Mark Bolan's teenage dream became a big thing last year. And you know, putting a plaque up for him around here suddenly makes this a kind of go-to destination for people, for all the Mark Bolan fans from all over Europe and further afield coming to visit here now. And just to say that the one of the first ones that I did get involved in was putting up a plaque commemorating a 12-year-old boy who actually is believed to be the youngest soldier to have served in the British Army in the First World War. This was Sidney Lewis. You know, of all the sort of First World War stories, all the battles, all the events, it was the fact that a 12-year-old boy actually went and fought at the Battle of the Somme that was one of the most outstanding and memorable stories that, you know, absolutely young people could kind of identify with that. And we went into all the schools around here and really pumped it up and made sure that that we absolutely hit the time with that one. We did it in September 2016, exactly 100 years after the Battle of the Somme. And as Kate mentioned, coming up now, we've got several plans. One of them is to put up a plaque commemorating the heritage in this area, enduring heritage of people of Romany, Gypsy and Irish traveller tradition. There are still 2 sites here on the banks of the Wandle, 2 traveller sites, people in buried, lavish, beautiful graves in the local cemeteries, reminding people of the extraordinary history. Many of them went on to settle in the area, working as costermongers and market traders. The Corruganza Boxmakers, this is another one. This is a group of very young women in this area. Cathy will know all about them, and through Mary MacArthur, basically went on strike in 1908, and it was 20 years after the matchstick women. This was another very important action that nobody knows about in this area, and it's really with a local girls' school, you know, just around the corner. It's really important for us to try and make sure that is more widely known by people in this area. And we're trying to do that through talks in schools and really getting it out there. And we want to see it on the wall and people getting to know the name of the Corruganza Boxmakers. And another thing that we've got on the go at the moment is something called Planet Tooting, which is a commemoration of the contribution made by migrants who've come to live in this area. Tooting, half the people, including myself in this area, weren't born in this country, but we've come here and we've all made some kind of difference, whether it's Huguenots, whether it's Sri Lankans, whether it's Somalis or people from Southeast Asia. We've all enriched this area in some way, and a massive project going on now involving local schools, getting them to contribute to actually writing a message on a plaque celebrating migration, and what a great opportunity that is for a young person to really add to the local heritage in the area. And listen, just quickly before I finish, I just want to talk about two things that are coming up very soon, one of which is being run by the Loughborough Road Histories Project, and that is going to involve a plaque to somebody called Nellie Roberts, who was an orchid artist at the Royal Horticultural Society for 56 years, lived in Brixton. Hopefully a plaque is going to be going up there within the next year. And if you're around on Saturday, join us for Nellie's Exotic Orchid Walk in this area, which is going to be followed a week later by Wake Up the Wandle, celebrating Frank Kitts, another Wandle worker, somebody who worked with William Morris, but also very much an activist, and somebody who did good things for people less fortunate than himself in this area. So I think I haven't heard the bell, Kate, but I think I'm pretty much.
Did not hear my bell. I did my bell.
I didn't hear. No, I missed your bell completely.
I need to ring my bell a bit louder. You're fine though.
Apologies there.
No, not at all. No, it's really fascinating.
Well, you should have waved frantically at me to get me to shut up. But,
no, it's far too interesting. No, don't worry, not at all. Don't worry, Geoff. Actually, I think unfortunately we just realised and heard that one of our panelists isn't able to make it today. So you all have a wee bit more time. So don't worry so much. I think I'll bing you after 8 minutes now, and we'll have more time for a bit more kind of questions and discussion at the end as well. So no worries at all. And yes, apologies. So it's our final speaker, Dr. Jack Biula, unfortunately can't make it, but we will put you in touch with kind of connection with his website to find out more about his work. Right, so thank you very much, Geoff. It just gives you an insight into the range of absolutely fascinating work that Geoff is undertaking. And as I say, I feel really privileged and lucky to be living in the local area that Geoff is doing his work, because it's really noticeable. You see it around and about. So it's really making an impact in the local area. So thank you, Geoff, for all the work that you do locally. So now I'm going to move on to our second speaker. And our second speaker is Dr. Cathy Hunt. And sorry, Cathy, just line up here. So Cathy and Geoff are collaborators, and particularly around the 1908 strike that Geoff spoke about, because that was led by Mary MacArthur, and Cathy Hunt is an expert on Mary MacArthur. So we're really lucky to have her here today. So Cathy's an independent community historian whose research focuses on women's lives, their work and their labour activism in Britain in the first half of the 20th century. And she's the author of a biography, really highly respected biography of the trade unionist, Mary MacArthur. So over to you, Cathy.
Thank you very much, Kate. Right, okay, well, blue plaques, statues, and other commemoration show, for best or for worst, aspects or versions of the past. And I'm always very excited when I find one that chimes with what matters to me. But I have to accept that that doesn't happen nearly often enough. Yet, but I do love the changes that are starting to come. What I really want to be able to do is to connect with the ordinary lives of women and to see their histories all around me. I want commemoration that recognises everyone's London, reflecting the past, but also our journeys and who and where we are today. So I'm a labour and social historian. I write about women's struggles and determination in the workplace, excuse me, to get better pay and conditions, to improve the lives of their families. I write about those who are almost always left out of history because their stories are not as seen as important or interesting enough to capture and preserve. And these are the people I look for when I walk around London. Well, any city or town, to be honest. And at this point, I should say I'm not, by the way, a Londoner. And finding traces of their past is the thing that gives me goosebumps. I'm also, and this is perhaps more important to me than the day job, the great-granddaughter of 4 London women who worked as domestic servants, shop assistants, laundresses, seamstresses. I had 2 London grandmothers and a London mum, and they were all working women, and I want to celebrate their London. So why does it matter? Why do we want to remember past tough times? Because this is life for all of us. Whilst I'm interested in discovering that a famous actor or writer or politician lived in the house I just walked past, I take my inspiration from all those who have stood up against oppressors and laboured to make my life better too. And their houses or places of work might not be there anymore because they were never grand enough to stay standing, but I don't think that matters. I've written quite a lot about the union that supported the Corruganza girls in 1908, the National Federation of Women Workers, led by the charismatic Mary MacArthur, who does have a blue plaque on the house in Golders Green where she died in 1921, aged just 40. And the work that Geoff is doing to have a plaque to commemorate the strike at the Corruganza factory in Somerstown, Earlsfield, is vital, not just because this was an important event in women's labour history, but because I think it encourages us to understand more about life in early 20th century London for ordinary people. It doesn't matter whether the actual Corruganza factory is still there or not. It matters that we think about the layers of history on our streets. And the best bit of my own research is always the bit where I pound the streets, walking in the footsteps of those I'm writing about. And that's what I would love to see reflected in blue plaques across London. And if a building's gone, that tells a story too. Buildings that were not fit for purpose in the first place, outdated, ill-ventilated factories. Let's celebrate that these have gone, but let's also celebrate and remember those who didn't accept the conditions in which they lived and worked. There are so many opportunities to record those who were hidden then and whose 21st century sisters and brothers are hidden still. We celebrate the victories, but we remember those who are still working on poor contracts with no sick pay, no holidays, in poor working environments. So I want to be reminded that there are those who have fought for better. Sometimes I think, and I'm sure Louise probably feels the same, that I don't see the London that other people see. I've lost count of the times I've come out of libraries after a day's researching and been quite confused by the signs of modern life that I see all around me, but also then intrigued to think about both the changes and the continuities. But they are all there for us to see if we look. The former Sunlight Laundry building in Fulham, where there was a branch of Mary MacArthur's union, and where my great-grandmother and great-aunt worked before the First World War, has an impressive green tiled exterior. I don't see the luxury flats it's now converted into any more than I see that the house where my mum grew up, with its one cold tap and outside bathroom and toilet, is now quite a flashy pad. I still see the shed with the outside loo. So I would like to see blue plaques near to where women struck for better pay, like the Idris soda water factory in Camden, where one of the strikers, a young widow called Annie Lowen, went on to work for the union, changing not just her life, but those of many others. I want to be able to see the streets where the women came out onto, objecting to bad working conditions and injustice, and marched singing their strike song, which began, "Have you been to work at Idris? No, we won't go in today, for we're standing by a comrade and we'll never run away. She stood bravely by the union and she spoke up for us true. And if she got the sack, no, we'll never go back, whate'er they do, whate'er they do." And there are other strikes to remind us of brave working women, like those who poured out of the jam, pickle and sauce factories in Bermondsey in 1911. Let's have blue plaques for them and for those who worked alongside them to bring about change. There is a plaque to Susan Lawrence, who organised the women's school cleaners of the London County Council, who helped to organise women munitions workers during the First World War. a woman who became one of the first 3 Labour women MPs in Britain. Yet what it actually says on her plaque is social reformer, which kind of hides the work that she did, and it hides the women workers that she worked with. I reckon there absolutely could be a plaque on Dilke House in Mallet Street, Bloomsbury, home from 1917 to the National Federation of Women Workers, which represented women who were either excluded from other unions because they were women, or who were considered just too difficult to organise. It was always their work, by the way, not their temperaments that led to this assessment. Cities change, buildings come and go. And if we only commemorate those whose houses have survived, we're already biased in favour of those with the money. So it's great news that there will soon be a plaque commemorating the Matchwomen's Strike of 1888, and, for example, on the Ayers home in Hackney. These, for me, are what blue plaques are all about. Thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Cathy. And you denied me the thrill of binging my unheard buzzer. So I didn't bing it at all. You didn't miss it. Thank you very much. And I just think you raised so many evocative and important questions there in your presentation. And I think I really like the point you made about how just because the buildings aren't there any longer doesn't mean that we should remember the people who have an association with that building, or just because we don't know perhaps the name of individuals who took part in some of this action, that the box workers, and I know Louise is going to talk a bit about the match girls, just because we don't know their individual names, again, doesn't mean that we shouldn't remember their effort and what they did and how they contributed to history. So all really important questions. So thank you, Cathy. Right, so I'm going to move on now to our next speaker. And our next speaker is Dr. Louise Raw. Hi, Louise. And Louise is a freelance activist, historian, teacher and author. And she became the historian of the Bryant and May Match Women's Strike by accident, but that sounds like a very good accident. As a trade union steward who'd left school at 15, she found the orthodox version of their story of the match girls that it didn't make sense as someone who'd been involved in strikes of women. And that started a historical whodunit, which is always the best kind of history, when you feel like you're a mini detective, over years of research culminating in her book, Striking a Light, and the proof that this was an incredibly influential female-led working class victory. So it's, a really important contribution to our understanding of female activism and women's labour history. So Louise also teaches for the International Federation of Study Abroad and Lawrence University, and runs Match Women's Festival, which is taking place this year on Saturday, the 9th of July. And she has put a link, which you can all click on and sign up for on the Eventbrite page for this event. So thanks very much for joining us, Louise. And I'll hand over to you. And yes, I will buzz you in due course, but take your time. We've got a wee bit extra time. So thank you.
Thank you. Once I get going on this, there's no stopping me. So I probably will be hearing that bell. Thank you so much, Kate. And thank you, Cathy and Geoff. Really just fascinating listening to you. And I'm so pleased and happy to have been invited today. Thank you very much for having me. So why did I get so obsessed with the Bryant and May Match Women? Why was I so keen to bring their story to light and to get them the Blue Plaque, which, yes, will be there. Thank you, English Heritage, on the 5th of July. When I came to the story, it was considered an event that was interesting, but not really significant, not really a fact of labour history and trade union history. A lot about that didn't make sense to me. And when I researched it, and yes, I did accidentally become a historian, this can happen to you, be very careful out there, I discovered that the reason they weren't celebrated was everything to do with who they were. Because when these women and girls, very young, teenagers, a lot of them, walked out of that match factory in Bow, in Fairfield Road, off the Bow Road in the East End, if any of you know it, they were the Victorians' worst nightmare. This is 1888, it's the height of the glittering Victorian age. Everything about these women was wrong. Everything about them was what the Victorians didn't like to celebrate. And when I came to researching it myself, I was quite surprised by how some things hadn't changed. So what was wrong with the matchwomen? Well, everything. They had blotted their copybooks completely as far as the Victorians were concerned. So firstly, they were women. That's bad. You know, the Victorians didn't really like women unless they were Queen Victoria. All middle-class angels in the house, matchwomen sadly failing to be either of those things. They were working-class women who were working in factories outside their homes. This was very, very bad and threatening. They were also EastEnders, again, bad. You could just about be poor and respectable. Hang on to that word respectable, it's very key. If you didn't come from the East End, but the East End, everyone had decided, who wasn't working class, was just this awful criminal, you know, dangerous area where they'd cut your throat for tuppence. Worse, they went one worse though. They insisted on being Irish too, or largely Irish, not all of them. And the problem with this was that the Victorians had decided the Irish were a black race. They weren't, but the Victorians, and that they were therefore inferior because no one asked the Victorians to make racism worse, but they kindly decided to do that anyway by giving us eugenics. No one asked for eugenics, but we got it, a Victorian invention that isn't often spoken about. So women were supposed to know their place, and these women absolutely didn't. Factory girls in general were supposed to be, you know, immoral and shocking, and that they had fun, which was bad. You know, Victorian girls just wanted to have fun. They went to gym palaces, they went to music halls, they enjoyed life. You're not supposed to do that if you're poor. You're supposed to be quiet and not seen and not heard. So that's the employees. The employers, Bryant and May, very different. And the Bryant directors are living in the most palatial country estates. Look up Stoke Park. It's incredible. You'd think it was royals living there. And they'd done all of this in one generation off the profits they'd made. P.S. In order to do that, you don't treat your workers very well. But when the women first went out on strike in the summer of 1888, the first response of everyone really was, how dare they? How dare they? You know, they're very lucky to have been given jobs by these gentlemen. Absolutely outrageous. The police were brought in just in case these dangerous matchwomen kicked off a revolution. They paraded the streets when they went on strike, and not having Twitter or even Facebook, I'm a historian, so I can tell you categorically they didn't. They used what they had, their voices and their numbers. And they sang songs, just like Cathy was talking about. They sang, we're going to hang old Bryant on a sour apple tree. Now, not a TUC approved method of arbitration, clearly hanging your employers, but they got the message out. People came out from their windows, from their doors, onto their balconies and said, what's going on? They told them, and they threw down money, which formed their first strike funds, because they had no trade union, no means of surviving once they were out of the workplace. What they did, what they achieved was incredible. In around 2 weeks, they got an end to fines, which were being taken out of their wages illegally, a separate dining room out of the fumes of white phosphorus, which was causing a disease they called phossy jaw. The phosphorus particles in the air caused your jawbone to rot while you were still alive. You'd be spitting out particles of your own skeleton, just absolutely horrific, through abscesses in your jaw. Most importantly, they went back to work as members of the largest union of women and girls in the country. They forced Bryant and May to let them unionise. The established union movement of the day did not want women like this, the underclass, in their nice, shiny union movement. This was all too much for history, not just at the time, but subsequently. These are not the sort of people that change the world. We're very clearly told this. It's great individuals, isn't it? We're comfortable with that. But women like this, you know, kind of Larry, factory women who sometimes had to fight physically to protect themselves and sang very lewd and rude musical songs, good grief, we can't have them being celebrated. So this weird thing happened. We can understand why the employers at the time said, oh, it's not really our work girls that are unhappy. They love working for us. They love the jaw rotting. It's this journalist called Annie Besant, middle-class journalist. She's made them go out on strike, and they're so ignorant. They've just gone, oh, God bless you, Mum. If you say we've got to go on strike, I suppose we will. nonsense to me as a woman who'd left school at 15, but worked with women from East End families and been on strike with them. I couldn't see that. If you tried suggesting to one of the women I know that for no reason, you don't know me, but I'm a vaguely socialist activist in the area, I'm a journalist, so you're going on strike because I've just decided. That was honestly how the strike was portrayed. I imagine you'd have got, a right hook if you tried suggesting that. It didn't make sense to me. That's how I first started researching it. It just didn't make sense. 25 years I researched it in the end because I had to prove not just that Annie Besant didn't lead the women, quite straightforward. For example, Annie Besant saying, I didn't lead the women. Why did they go on strike? What are they thinking of? Oh my God, they've gone on strike. I didn't mean them to do that. I mean, that's pretty significant. But then I had to prove the match women were capable of leading their own strike. And honestly, genuinely, when I kind of kicked my way into academia, I had male professors saying to me, this is absolutely ridiculous. It's feminist tokenism. You can't possibly suggest that these women who were just ignorant, uneducated girls could possibly have been political. How could they not have been? You didn't need to read Karl Marx cover to cover to know you were being exploited if your jaw was rotting and you were being paid starvation wages for working 12-hour days. So I came to understand, as I researched the women, why they'd been pushed out of history, sort of included, but not given the power and agency, simply because they weren't the sort of women we accept can do those things. And I mean, that has changed, and thank goodness they will be getting this plaque. But I'm old enough to remember when the papers would criticise working class women having any kind of fun as ladettes. This was this new shocking sort of scandal, wasn't it? The ladettes, women going out drinking and having fun and enjoying themselves. Things have not changed that much. If it took me to sort of trot along in about 2007 to research this, if it hadn't been looked at again in all that time since 1888, this says something about what we think is history. And I'm so glad that things are changing.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Louise. Thank you. And I love the way that you're giving us a sense of what it would really be like to be those match girls. So, both in the grim side of it, in the really horrible, dangerous working conditions, but also the solidarity that this kind of engagement in labour activism, both yourself and Cathy bringing out the songs that would have been sung, and the sense of solidarity that these young, girls, very impoverished and very limited, no education, and yet they were able to seek solace with co-workers, and how important that was to them, and how being able to remember them as a group. So in the plaque that you've managed to when is that going to appear, the Match Girls?
5th of July, the 5th of July.
5th of July, oh great. Okay, so I have to look out for that, excellent. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next speaker, and our next speaker is Rebecca Preston, and Rebecca is a historian who works with English Heritage. So we're really, again, incredibly grateful for Rebecca for coming along, because it's really useful for us to get an insight into the work that English Heritage is doing and actively working on diversifying the Blue Plaque Scheme in London. And Rebecca has contributed to many collaborative projects in the fields of social and urban history and geography with universities, museums, and other heritage organisations. And alongside her work in relation to Blue Plaques, her publications focus on landscape, the built environment, and the home. So over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you very much, Kate. Can you see my screen and hear me okay?
Yes, both, perfect. Yes.
Well, I've got a hard act to follow. Currently, about 14% of blue plaques within the English Heritage London scheme are to women, as we've heard today. We know this isn't good enough, and we're working really hard to improve the balance, but it's not without its challenges. The imbalance is due largely to the scheme's long history. It was founded by the Royal Society of Arts in 1866, when middle-class women had few opportunities for a life of public service or other public activity, whether in academia, government, the church, the military, which are traditional occupations for the figures commemorated in the early days of the scheme, men, of course. And working women were perhaps even less visible, despite working outside of the home in large numbers. And women of all classes did not have equal access to the vote until 1928. At the same time, there has been a historic slowness to acknowledge the contributions of women and other groups who have been traditionally underrepresented in the history of the scheme and in what we think of history more widely. The scheme was taken over by the London County Council in the early 20th century, and by 1905, there were 5 plaques to women, progress of sorts. Predictably, the first plaques to women were those who had made their way in the arts and the caring professions. So on the left, very briefly, is Joanna Baillie, a Scottish dramatist, and that's one of the few first surviving plaques to a woman put up by the RSA. The GLC took over in 1965, and on its watch, 262 plaques in total were put up, including some more to women, including Sylvia Pankhurst, and to Mary Seacole here on the right, heroine of the Crimean War. Over time, the plaques erected began to reflect social change and to include more women and other represented groups, but this was slow progress. In 1986, when English Heritage took over, there were still only 45 plaques to women. Since then, our organisation has put up around 135, and you can see this growth graphically in the slide here, up to about 2015, at the top right, if you can see that. And that's in the year in which English Heritage became a charity. Since 2016, when we called for more plaques to women, more than half of the plaques awarded by our expert Blue Plaques panel are to women. But until quite recently, only around a third of suggestions that we receive were for women. Public nominations they drive the scheme. And I'm really pleased to say that around half of all nominations are now to women, thanks to the public's enthusiastic response. I'll go through this quite quickly for speed, but these are just some of the women that we were able to commemorate in between lockdowns in 2020 and 2021. So Dame Helen Gwyn Vaughan, botanist and chief commander of the WAAC, Noor Inayat Khan, secret agent in occupied France, Caroline Norton, 19th century campaigner for women's legal rights, Catherine Lonsdale, scientist and peace campaigner, Helena Normanton, KC, and Ellen and William Craft, refugees from slavery and campaigners for its abolition. Clearly, we have a long way to go, but we're moving in the right direction. We also put up a small number of plaques to mark historic sites, and these commemorate a range of events or groups associated with a particular building. Importantly, these plaques allow us to remember communities who would otherwise be unlikely to receive a plaque on their own account due to building losses, the lack of records to place particular groups of people, including women, working people, and others hidden from history, but also because their legacy is a collective one. So this year, English Heritage will commemorate the Match Girl strike of 1888. Now, Louise has just shone a light on this very brilliantly, so I won't dwell on it, but just to say that we're absolutely delighted to be putting up the plaque at the former Bryant and May Works in Bow, where their actions will be widely available to see. This year, we're also putting up a blue plaque to another group of working women, commemorating the Ayers home in Hackney in the early 20th century. Now, the term Ayah referred to the South and East Asian women who served as the British as nannies in India, Hong Kong, and other colonies. And this home, so-called, provided shelter until their return to their home countries. Excuse the road apostrophe there. This year, we'll also be putting up plaques to the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies, which was the non-militant organisation. Further plaques are scheduled to commemorate other suffrage societies once final consents are in place. We had hoped to put them up together, but it wasn't possible. And while we're on the subject of suffrage, this year we will commemorate Britain's first professional female landscape gardener, Fanny Wilkinson, who was born in 1855 at her former home and office in Bloomsbury. She was landscape gardener to the Metropolitan Public Gardens and Playgrounds Association and later ran the Swanley Horticultural College for Women. And she was also an active member of the NUWSS. This month, we put up our first plaque of the year, a joint plaque in Brockley to Annie and Walter Maunder, the wife and husband team who are committed to making astronomy more accessible to amateur astronomers and to women in particular. So to sum up, I have no idea how I'm doing for time. English Heritage is committed to raising the numbers of plaques to women. And I think we've succeeded in this, although the proportion still needs to grow higher. And we're doing this with the help of the public. So without running through the criteria, I'll just leave them up here. We'd welcome your suggestions for women. And the outline criteria as if they should have made a great and lasting impact on society. For individuals, they should have been dead for more than 20 years, and the London building in which they lived or worked should still survive, and they should have contributed to the health and well-being of society as a whole. Done.
Thank you, Rebecca. And that's again perfect timekeeping. So you deprived me of my thrill. Thank you so much. And I just think it's so important to think about the context. So, on the face of it, you could, when you use that statistic, which I did, and which was a useful point to launch our conversation, which I'm hoping that we will have, an opportunity to speak amongst the panelists and with everyone attending here, around, why is it 14%? But I think then, then when you present the history of the English Heritage Plaques and Blue Plaques itself, then you begin to understand some of the obstacles and some of the reasons. And that's so important. You need to understand what some of the issues are to identify the solutions and to, and I think it's great that so many new plaques have been put up to women in more recent years. So thank you for setting that really important context. I was just wondering, where's for the National Union Women Workers, sorry, the NUWSS is the only way I can say it. Where is that going to be?
I'm going to have to check because I've got
no worries
in my head, and I'll give the wrong one and look at it.
No problem. I'll come back to you at the end. So as I said, apologies that our final speaker hasn't been able to join us. What we're going to do is we'll put I think Neil's going to share Dr. Jack Beula's really important work around sort of opening up the representation of those who are remembered on plaques through his community work. So we're going to put the link to his website into the chat so people can have a look at that. However, we are incredibly lucky to have with us Sean Creighton. I hope I'm pronouncing your surname correctly there, Sean. If not, tell me. Is that wrong?
No. Yeah.
Oh, okay, I got it right. Good. So Sean is an independent historian, a community historian who has worked with Jack, and who is very, very kindly, having come along to the event, has very kindly agreed to step in and speak a little bit about some of the work, I think maybe in Croydon, but I'll let you explain. And thank you very much for stepping into the breach, Sean. Much appreciated.
Right, well, thanks very much. Hello, everybody. Right, yes, I'm a historian of the labour movement. And I've worked
Sean, your sound is going a little bit on us there. I don't know.
Right, sorry.
Yeah, we missed maybe if you want to just start. Sorry, we just missed the beginning. It just went muffled.
Sorry. Right. My name's Sean Creighton. I'm an independent historian, as Cathy said.
Sorry, Sean, we're
and
losing
I do
Sean.
South Westmoreland history.
Sean, we're losing you completely there. If you can try turning your camera off and speaking, that might save your bandwidth a little bit, and we might be able to hear your
All right.
your audio slightly better.
Okay, is right. I've known Jack for a number of years and worked on two particular projects with him. One to John Archer, the Black Mayor of, and that went up on Park Road, and Coleridge Taylor of Croydon in 2012, the 100th anniversary of where we put a plaque up as one of the final activities. He also corralled me into speaking at the unveiling of the plaque to Cy Grant. And in addition to plaques, Jack has also done the War Memorial at Windrush Square. He's also done a special commemorative statue to nurses in the NHS from the Caribbean. And his plaques include a number of women, particularly Claudia Jones, Connie Mark, Mary Prince, Jessica Huntley, along with her husband Eric, Marcus Garvey's wife, widow, Amy Garvey, and various others, including Phyllis Wheatley, the 18th century slave poetess who came to London. So Jack's done fantastic work and continues to do so, and wants to develop more plaques outside London, but it's all based on a lot of voluntary effort and small grant support, and it's been amazing to see how much he's been able to achieve in the last few years. Now, John Archer was also commemorated in a plaque by English Heritage, at which I spoke at the unveiling on his house in the back street behind Battersea Park Road. And it did take a long time to get English Heritage to agree to do that plaque. But the thing about women and plaques, of course, is that there's a big range of organizations who put up their own plaques and who therefore are not constrained by the policies of English Heritage. So, for instance, Battersea Society put up one to Caroline Ganley, a Labour and Socialist councillor in Battersea and MP in Battersea. Battersea Labour Party put up one to Charlotte Despard, the suffragette campaigner, as well as activist on a range of other issues. But then it's not just a question of lack of women. I mean, parts of London where there are very few blacks is one of those. There aren't any, as far as I can ascertain, to women. And I've got a growing who deserve a plaque. And I recently gave a talk for an International Women's Day event to about 40 people at a lunch club on the issue of not enough plaques for women. And they really appreciated the highlighting that issue. And they've asked me to give a series of talks on the women that I particularly highlighted. I've kind of been in touch with Geoff, and it was fantastic to hear his presentation because it's a reminder of how much he's been able to achieve and it's completely kind of changed the whole climate of historical activity in Wandsworth. And I just wish I had his kind of energy and imagination to do what he's done elsewhere. But I think one of the real problems still is possibly the policies of English heritage. And I don't know the extent to which they have changed. A few years ago, they published a guide to plaques, which was a really good initiative. And it was a fantastic conference, very well attended conference. But the one thing that really dismayed people at it from all over the country was when one of the speakers, not an English heritage speaker, but a black historian, talked about a promiscuity of plaques was needed. Plaques should be everywhere. And the English heritage team at the time were absolutely appalled by such a concept. I think that the more plaques there are, the better, because as Geoff is beginning to show, if you get loads of plaques in a small area, you are going to attract people to come and visit. And if you can then get tours around those plaques, as it's so easy to do in central London, that's all the better for those areas. So anyway, I just want to leave it at that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you so much. And again, thank you just for stepping into the breach. Very much appreciated. So thank you. Very, very grateful to you. And it's nice that you brought us full circle. So we began with Geoff and we've ended with Geoff. There's a nice synchronicity there. So I think we're going to in 1 minute, we're going to start sharing the questions that some of you put into the Q&A. But if it's okay, Neil, if it's okay if I have one question that to see if our panelists might wish to respond to. And I think obviously the common theme and the common thread through all of the work that each of you do and that you've spoken about today is this concept of the celebration and remembering people through the built environment. And I just wondered if you perhaps, well, why do you think that particular aspect of this association with an individual, or as we've been arguing much more here today, we need to remember groups of individuals if we don't know individual names, with a place or a building, and why that's important for the development, as Sean was kind of thinking about community history and a much greater awareness of where we fit in our environment and how our environment has changed over time and the people who used to live in the streets that we now walk. So I don't know if any of you said why you particularly are interested in this method of commemorating and celebrating past lives. Anyone who wants to jump in? Louise.
I do think it's just interesting as a prompt for people, isn't it? So if you're walking down past the old match factory in Bow, which is now a housing community, this lovely plaque that's going up that says Match Girls Strike might just make you think, oh, interesting. And now that we can all look it up on our phones, we haven't got to remember till we get home, which if you're middle-aged like me means no chance, it's forgotten. And what I particularly like about it is that Bow now is such an interesting area. It's the area that created grime music, which is very interesting. It's a form of protest music. I think it links in with those songs that the Match Women sung. And there are a lot of women in grime now trying to move that forward, who have their own culture, who sing songs about, there's a song about Bow called Living in the Third, but they had no idea until I was speaking to them about it recently, that women who in many ways were very similar to them, this cool girl gang who were walking down the streets, knowing all the latest words to all the latest songs, had lived there. I can, as a historian, as Cathy was saying, we see all the echoes and the shadows. I can completely see the palimpsest there. I can completely see how similar these groups were. It was wonderful to be able to tell them about that and see their reaction, but I won't need to when there's that plaque there, because they'll see it themselves and they'll hopefully be able to look it up and see the people who trod those streets before them.
Absolutely. Thank you, Louise. Rebecca?
I'd just like to chip in there and echo what Louise said. We believe at English Heritage, but also personally, that bricks and mortar is just such a powerful way to connect, to bring the past to life, to really imagine who might have lived there in a way that personally I think a plaque that says lived or worked near here doesn't quite get it. And if I could illustrate that really quickly with an example, last year when we put up the joint plaque to Ellen and William Craft, we couldn't have a pavement unveiling because it was in between lockdowns, but 6 of the great grandchildren came over from the States. And it's kind of what we do as a job, but it was hugely powerful for them to stand on the steps and imagine their relative opening the front door, moving through, working in those spaces, campaigning them, sleeping in them. And, you know, I think we get a little bit of that, even if we're not related to that person. We just think, oh, who's that? Someone I've heard of, somebody that I might go home and look up. Or those of us that are technologically savvy, as Louise said, we can look it up on our phones.
Thank you, Rebecca. I don't know if Cathy or Geoff, you want to add anything there? Cathy? Yeah.
Just very briefly, I do agree, and I think it's really powerful when the building is there. But as I said earlier, if it isn't there, sometimes we need to celebrate the fact that it's gone, and it's gone for the good reason. And you know, and that's why I like the idea of the community plaques that English Heritage are moving towards, because if that to me is so much more important. I quite often just will walk past a plaque where somebody famous lived or worked and it doesn't connect at all. I just think, oh yeah, that's nice, but I don't really, don't draw anything really from it. Whereas, but to know that even if the streets have completely changed, like I say, if I walk out of a local studies library after a day's research and I struggle actually to see where I am, and it doesn't matter to me, I like to be able to put those layers on top of each other, and then I still can see, it doesn't matter if the building's not there anymore, because I can still sense the making of that community.
Thank you. Yeah. And Geoff, I don't know if you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I mean, just to say, Kate, I sort of started out doing this First World War commemoration project in this area, and I was kind of plotting on a map where soldiers who'd kind of died in the First World War had where they'd lived. So suddenly all these houses are around here, which, I'd kind of, I'd walked past hundreds of times without sort of thinking. Suddenly I knew a little bit about who lived there, and it totally changed my perception of the area. I mean, obviously, until I started walking around telling other people about that, it was pretty meaningless for anybody else. But yeah, as soon as these plaques start appearing everywhere, and by the way, Sean, I really appreciate you saying those kind words about me, because what you've done over a lengthy period of time, and Jack as well. Jack's one of my all-time heroes. I first sort of heard about him 10 years ago when he came to the Wandsworth Heritage Festival, and his work is just incredible, and it was a real privilege for me to shake his hand after the African Caribbean War Memorial event in Brixton. But honestly, yeah, we just can't have enough of these, whether they're plaques or kind of information boards telling you about what happened somewhere, like there is along the Wandle in this area. But there's nothing, there's nothing really apart from that. All the council notice boards are full of their own kind of, their own propaganda, basically, and information about. There's nothing sort of historical. And the more of this there is, the more people appreciate where they live, and they love it, and they warm to it, and they connect, and they get on, and they're proud, and they won't be dropping litter around, and they look after it, and they'll talk about it and bring in the tourists, and it's a no-brainer. It makes so much sense.
Thank you, Geoff. Thanks. So I think, Neil, you've got some questions, I think, lined up for us.
We have got a few questions, and I'm conscious of time, so we'll get through as many as we can. So our first question is, can a blue plaque be put up to a person whose house no longer exists because it was condemned property? And I think we kind of touched a little bit on that. But then the same question asked question in the chat box: is not the contribution of a woman more important rather than the actual condemned house one lived in say the 1800s?
I wonder, Cathy, I don't know if you want to pick. Oh, sorry, Rebecca. Rebecca, do you want to?
Well, no, I was just going to say that the English Heritage Scheme doesn't put plaques up on buildings that have come down, so it would rule it out. But as we've heard, there are other schemes that do things differently. So I think, you know, you'd be better off to answer that one.
Sure.
And I think, yes, I mean, yes, we honour, you know, the memory of those who've done incredible things, or, you know, their lives lived. And as I said before, you know, I think if we can give a sense of community from a wider picture, then yeah, I agree.
Thank you. Laura asked, how many stories like the Matchmakers do you think there are? Stories whereby women's actions have been diminished in how that history was initially written.
That's such a good question. The Match Women were my best ever teachers, really, because through them, they've opened my eyes to this world completely of hidden histories. And I collect stories now. And I also do a feature on BBC Radio London of kind of little known lives like this. I can't give people plaques, but this is my tiny way of commemorating people. And let's just say they asked me to do 4 histories of little known London women 4 years ago. I was supposed to just do 4, and I'm still going. That's how many stories there are, and I'm nowhere near running out. If I know hundreds, just me, just in London, how many must there be? There must literally be millions. And it's usually working class women, working class people, it's LGBT people, it's Black and Asian people of colour, it's disabled people. These are the stories that are not getting out there because of all the biases that we still have, unfortunately.
Absolutely, I volunteer for volunteer for Queer Britain, which is setting up the UK's first kind of like, you know, bricks and mortar LGBTQ plus museum. And to me, it's kind of crazy that didn't already exist because of so much history that's been written out.
And there's so much history there just with that, isn't there? I did something about the Gateways Club recently, like this lesbian club that's really, you know, little known. And I've talked about the persecution of gay men in London from the 1700s. There was this purity committee that just went around persecuting people until London's got absolutely sick of it. And then we have so many heroes and heroines who were LGBT as well as other things. It's there, exactly as you're saying, Neil. It's not that it's not there. My goodness, it's there in absolute abundance. It's just that we don't think to look for it, and we really need to.
Oh, well, do check out Queer Britain's first, is it their temporary home in Granary Square in King's Cross. So there's lots of fantastic stuff there.
Can I just very quickly, sorry to interrupt you both.
No, not at all.
I think I'm allowed to say that the Gateways Club is shortlisted. So it'll be a little while coming through, but it's a nice.
I'm so pleased because I know that
amazing.
I'm in touch with the daughter of the woman who owned the Gateways. I'm in touch with her daughter still. So yes, she may well know that, but yes, thank you. That's wonderful to know.
I'm not sure if I was supposed to say it, but I just did.
Oh, well, it's out there now. Sounded like a cracking venue. Next question. Is it known how many nominations are received to commemorate Muslims?
Again, if that's to English heritage, I can't tell you off the top of my head, but I could probably find figures for those people who were known or were publicly Muslim. But again, the other schemes will do things differently.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Does anyone else want to? Thanks, Rebecca. Does anyone else want to jump in there? Anyone know of any that you'd like to share? If not, we'll move on to the next question. Okay. Thank you. Laura asked for Rebecca, of the suggestions from the public about women for plaques, do you only get suggestions about good women? Obviously, the plaques and statues of some men are being queried at the moment, rightly so. I always find it interesting at school when people see my women's timeline display, when people are shocked when I have included women who are more problematic. For example, is this another element of inequality? Do we remember all men but only good women? And Laura shares an example of the most commented one on is Aung San Suu Kyi. I'm not sure I pronounced that right. And she said, not to say that we should just keep on putting up more plaques and statues of people we don't want to celebrate. I just thought it was interesting the way people respond to men in history versus women in history.
Well, what a brilliant question. I guess that comes down to what you mean by good. I should think that very many of the pioneering women that we've honoured with plaques were thought bloody difficult, because that's what you call women who stick their neck out. Separate to that, we don't celebrate notoriety just for the sake of it. So the LCC included a clause in the 50s that said that somebody should have contributed to the health and well-being of society. But prior to that, yes, you know, I put my hands up. We have quite a few eugenicists, male and female, didn't discriminate, and things have changed. You know, the plaque scheme is part of social history. We're not just recording it.
And if I can cheekily jump in there as well, I think it's a brilliant question. Thanks, Laura. It's a really great question. But so yes, you will have controversial figures. I'm thinking like Mary Stopes, for example, who did a huge amount in terms of informing women, particularly working class women, about birth control, but also was a eugenicist, as Louise mentioned in her presentation. You know, the invention of eugenics in the Victorian era, and Mary Stopes certainly pushed that forward with full gusto. So there's really problematic individuals. But I was thinking, just when you talk about the plaques, and I was shaping a similar question about, you know, there's only good girls, because again, Louise has talked about, you know, sort of who's respectable and who's not respectable. But there's an amazing character who I teach on my criminal justice history course called Annie Diamond, who was a criminal and a pickpocket, and who led a gang in Elephant and Castle called the 40 Elephants. I just love this. This is one of my favorite lectures I give. So she was terrible. You know, she terrorized people. She went into people's houses and robbed stuff and shoved the things down her big bloomers under her skirts. But I'd love to see, but you know, so in some ways I'd love to see a plaque to her, but you know, she was a robber and a thief. So it's funny, it's difficult to know how one would do that in such a way. But yeah, so it can be quite complicated business deciding who gets a plaque and who doesn't. So sorry, just wanted to chip that one in.
So we are, and Laura's popping in the chat box, Annie Diamond, excellent example. So just to say we are nearly running out of time, and I just want to give our panel one last round robin to say, what message would you like to leave with our audience today when it comes to the theme breaking the bias and the work you're doing? So we'll go in order of presentation. Geoff, we'll start with you. You're on mute, Geoff.
Yeah, my message would be just, you know, we've all got to work a little bit harder to dig out good stories and ask around and just really work to kind of make sure that we are breaking the bias, and that we're, you know, everybody's fully represented, and that's hopefully what I'm going to do around here.
Thank you, Geoff. Cathy?
I would just say, keep looking around you when you're walking. Be inspired by those layers of history. And yeah, that's it really.
Thank you. Louise?
I'd like everyone to be a citizen historian. I'd like everyone to be aware that what their granny did or what their grandpa did, or the story that they happen to know about the strike or the factory in their road, is just as valid, and push that. And I'd like to say also, I do this thing on BBC London. So if you know of a great story, I literally do talk about people's grandparents and mothers and stories I hear. You can find me, it's a weird name, Raw. You can find me on Twitter or Facebook, and just message me. And I'm really happy to bring your stories to light if I can.
Thank you so much. And Rebecca? You're on mute.
Send us your nominations. If you go to the English Heritage website and click on Visit Us and then Blue Plaques, you will find the criteria. And if you have an idea you're not quite sure about for a plaque to a group similar to the Match Girls, Collective Action, or an otherwise less well commemorated group, get in touch and we can assist with whether the building might survive.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone. A huge thank you to our audience for your questions, your comments in the chat box, for bringing it to life. And Kate, I'm going to hand over to you for our summary and closing words.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. So yes, just to echo Neil's comments, thanks again. I think we're well on our way towards breaking the bias, actually. I'm feeling very uplifted at the end of this panel, which kind of began as a bit of an addressing an issue, but I think from just the individual work that you're all doing is so important. And is conducted with such passion and commitment to the cause. that I feel really reassured that actually we're well on our way to, this is a problem that can be solved, and you are all working in your individual ways and together to solve this problem. So, and I think just talking about the people who lived in our streets, in our neighborhoods, and as and Cathy said, do look up and think about who lived in those houses and those buildings and who walked on the streets. And I think it just makes life so much more interesting. So thank you to the brilliant questions posed by those who took time out to spend this hour and a bit with us. And thanks to Sean again for stepping in at the last minute. And last thing, just thanks to Neil, our great host who organises these events so well. And so thank you very much, Neil. Thanks a million. Okay, I think we're done.
Yeah, we are. Thanks, everyone. This has been recorded. It will be shared with everyone who registered, regardless whether they attended or not. Please share it. Your help in sharing this can help reach wider audiences beyond the event itself. So please do feel free to share with anyone you feel would be interested or might benefit from listening in. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again. Thank you.